So it's really as we move towards the right that we get towards full replication, and that is, for all the analysis that you performed, having the code available to share, and an added bonus is having the code plus the actual data. And lots of journals are making this as a requirement, or is a requirement now. You having that data there. And then, of course, linked and executable code and data all together, right? That whole sort of package. And so the use case that I'm going to present is just to show you that, and I'm sure many of you are already doing this, is to go beyond just the code. The script that you ran to create the results, and things like adding comments, adding interpretation of results, and keeping track of the different packages, versions of packages that you use. So I will be touching on sort of three components of that big picture, that slide from Julie from part one, and I'll talk about them individually as I go through them. So what I'm going to do is move to actually RStudio, but maybe before I do that, I would just like to maybe get a show of hands to see how many of you use R RStudio, and R Markdown particularly regularly for your analyses. All right, I'm seeing quite a few hands go up, so okay, that's great. So this is relevant, and probably this may also just be something that is known to you. All right, so what I have just as a quick use case, I don't want to take up too much time, is just to show you, here I have this R script, right? It has the code in there. I've done, gone the little extra mile in that I have comments for the different sections of code that I have. And what I want to do is turn this into an actual, into a markdown. And so I'm going to rename my file. And rather than have it the .r extension, I will do .rmd. And so now it's a markdown that I can basically take this file and I can knit it to create an HTML. But there's a couple of things that I need to do in order to get there. And so the first step is sort of adding more documentation. So the few things that I'm going to add are a basic YAML header at the top. And so that's what this text over here represents. It's giving my report a title, a meaningful title to let people know this is the information that's in it. This is the author of this report. This is the date that it was generated. So just some metadata. So giving some information about what's contained in this actual document. Where my script on its own, you see it, there's actually none of that information there. So I'm gonna go up to the top here and just copy and paste that in. I also have some additional section called output, where I'm indicating that I'm creating this HTML. And I also have some sort of optional things that you can add basically to make it a little nicer. You have code folding. So it's a feature that basically will show up in your report to hide the code, having a table of contents. So there, you can go much more like beyond this in terms of the fancy aesthetics that I'm showing here, but just to show you that it goes a long way for documentation. The next thing that I will do is, maybe I'll put that in quotations. Is each one of these sections here, oh, I heard someone unmute. Was there a question? Feel free to interrupt me with questions. I should say that as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is create what are called code chunks and just basically put everything in inside a code chunk. So I'm going to say for my libraries, I'm going to create a little code chunk and put the actual code in there. So basically everything that's not inside the code chunk is actual text that will show up in my report. And so with these hashtags, that indicates headers. So I'm going to have a header and then the subheader. And so I'll go through my report. It's a very, go through my script. It's a very short script here. So I'll just copy and paste the code into these little code chunks. And so everything that's not in a code chunk, it will be some text in my report. Okay. And again, if there are any questions, feel free to, stop and interrupt me. I'm happy to answer anything. So this is some code from a differential expression analysis that we're using. And so maybe what I'll do here. Seem to be getting these errors. Okay. I guess this goes with live coding. Not really sure.
I would keep going and
Keep
not
going.
worry about the errors.
Okay.
You can always figure it out in a bit.
Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm going to just remove the rest of this. I'm going to save my file. I'm going to hit knit to knit my document. Got a little typo there. All right.
It is in the same directory, so I think that you have to remove data.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. And all right, so there we go. Just to give you an example of the report that can be generated. And the idea here is that you get all of the code that you use to create your analysis in addition to text. And so this is just, different headers that I have for the different sections. But essentially what you'd like to do is add interpretation. And so add additional text to say, okay, these are the figures that I've generated. And this is the information that it illustrates in it. So basically going beyond the code, but also with your comments in terms of what it is you did to get there, but also comments on the actual results that you've generated and integrating the results with your code. The final thing, how our Markdown can and these types of notebooks can also help with reproducibility is include information on your code and your versions of packages and software that you're using. And so we don't have this in the current report, but running session info at the very end of your report will basically print out that information, all of the individual packages that you are using, just having that handy there in the bottom of your report. And so that's just an exercise, a sort of use case to show you that you can take your script, your R script, or this will vary depending on the programming languages that you're using, but if you're using Python, Jupyter notebooks can be helpful for this. Basically taking the actual code that you're using, incorporating information, documenting exactly what you did, incorporating interpretation, incorporating figures, and then finally incorporating information on the different versions of packages that you use. So that's just the short use case for reproducible reporting. And now I will pass it on to Lorena to walk you through the third use case.
Good timing, Mita.
Okay, thank you very much. I always love, do you know why you see that error? Because when you rename the file, RStudio keeps thinking that it's R. So it's an R script, even if it's not. Or life. So I'm going to talk about Git and GitHub. I want to ask how many of you use that, because I'm sure that all of you use one or other tool to do versioning. And so I'm going to lead with that happy thought. And one of the most used is GitHub because offer many features. So what I'm going to do is to use this example because this is a good repository that you can go and you will see the best practices that actually you can get if you really want to use GitHub or any other similar services to do development of a tool. This is a specific pipeline, a RNA-seq pipeline, and there is a lot of contribution, like 37, so it's a good example of something that is really working. The main thing that I guess that the first thing that you need to know about these services is that you have your code in a place and you have different branches, and you will keep track of all the changes. By default, you will have one branch that is master, but it's going to be renamed to main. Finally, it took us a little bit to get a better name for our things. So I think that they will force the change soon. And if you create a repository now, it will be main, what makes more sense. And this is where you will put the files and the code that are stable. That is like kind of stable. You can define stable as you want, but it's like, at least it's working. Many people can use it and it's like, okay, it works for the majority. And the best thing is to leave that way. And if you are working, changing something, adding a feature, fixing something, whatever, this actually is available. You can apply this to a report or an analysis. It doesn't need to be a tool, but in this case, it's just development of a tool. You can have many branches where you try things, but in general, there is a second branch that is pretty much used, that is dev or devel. And this is where you will keep adding features and fixing. And at some point when you decide, okay, this could be the next stable version or the next version that I want to show to people, you merge these to master, main, sorry, a lot of years of bad habits. And then that is what people will see by default. Saying that, this is kind of the first rule, but there are many other tips that it will be good to use. It will make your life easier. For instance, GitHub allows you to have many information there that it will help you to develop a tool. Some of the files that is important to have is the Readme, because the Readme is what people will see, and it's good to have an intro to whatever you have there. So it's not a blank page. But there is other important files like code of conduct. So it's important to have that. This actually let people know that you are trying to create a good environment. And if something happened, because when many people work together, things can happen, then you can apply this code of conduct and keep the environment safe. So it's always good to have that when you work with people, even if it's a small group. And the other thing that is good is a change log. And this is where you will ideally put all the additions and fixes or whatever you are doing to your code or your report, your analysis, so you know what has been happening for the time that you were working on that. That makes very transparent what is happening. And in terms of structure, the other thing that you can add, and there are services that help you with that, is documentation. So if, for instance, you create a docs folder and you put markdown files there, just by default, you will see the files there and you can go through them. But there is this read the docs service that you can integrate with GitHub and other services that you can add a repository. These are two of mine. And you connect them, and every time that you change here anything, it will render this in something that you can access immediately through their server. So it will be like your tool and Reddit doc. So you forget about everything else. You just modify the markdown, the source file, and you have the documentation immediately available for people. And beside that, ideally, if you use Docker or Conda, you have your files here. So you can actually allow people to create your reproducible environment besides sharing directly. So if people want to create the Docker by itself instead of the Lodi or whatever, they can do it, or the content environment. So everything, you can pack everything in the same place and put it here. And in that way, people could run everything pretty quickly. So this is kind of the main maybe things that they will affect any kind of versioning tool. But GitHub offer cool things that I guess that is what people, developers like a lot. So you see this folder that is .github and is allowed to put your information there that GitHub will treat specifically, and it will show in your repository in a way. Like, for instance, you can have issues templates, and you can have issues that will be bug reports or feature requests, or here information of what you want people to see. So it will make easier interaction with people. And actually, when you open an issue, this is what you see. So you can select one or another, or go to the information. So you read about how you open an issue. And then you avoid a lot of interaction that maybe is just too much to handle when you can just have a template. The other, in the same way, when you open pull request, because you want to contribute to the code, so you change the changes, then do a pull request, you can have a template for that. What is good about this is that it's actually telling you what to do. So it's easy to get a nice modification of the code that follows all the rules. And you just make sure that everything runs, that is following everything that they ask you to follow. And you don't need to remember every time that, oh, I need to run the test or this other test or whatever. Or change the chain log. This is something that I always do last and I always forget. So it's very helpful just to not to try to remember everything. And the last bit of information, because at the end is code development, and ideally you want to make sure that always everything works. So you have this kind of workflows. You can associate this with continuous integration that now everybody is using GitHub Actions, because I have to say that it's very convenient. Travis was another, CI is another service that allows you to do that. The meaning of continuous integration is that every time that you create a change and you push it to the repository in any branch that you want, this triggers a series of events. It could be any kind of event. It could be checking a specific code. It could be checking if the length of the code, or running tests, all the tests that you want to make sure that you're not breaking something that was working. So for instance, these people have a lot of things. Linting is one of the workflows they have. I would say that this is quite readable. Like, even if you haven't seen it ever, you can guess what is happening. So you will have the name of the workflow, then when to run that. So in push, in pull request, in release that are published. Okay, so then jobs. And jobs, you define the jobs, all the things that you want to do. Inside the jobs, you can have steps that are using these actions. So that you can think about this as Docker things. So it's just that they have actions that you can call and it will run. So you don't need to do the same all the time or copy paste or whatever. You just does that. You can call the versioning. So in this case, you want to do the action of check out the repository, set up nodes, that is a service, a tool, you install some dependencies, and you run your command. And this all the time that you want. And this is only for checking the code best practices, but of course you can do running like the tool or rendering. You can put your R markdown here and create an action that will render every time that you push a new version, and then you forget maybe to do it manually. So that is things that you could do here. And you can add conditions like only run this if this is true. So it allows you to do anything. I have to say, I mean, and you can put all you want. You can create outputs of these artifacts that you have access to them to see that if things looks good or not. That was something I discovered recently. So for instance, you want to create a PDF at the end because I want to know how that looks like. So then you will check if it's okay, then I will merge. If not, then I won't do anything. So that is, I think that will be the main points. And just to summarize, because I like you to go through what you will do if you want to set up something like that, is you have the main branch and the devel branch for stable and development. Some people block the main branch, so you don't push directly. That is depending on in what stage you are or how many people work on that. Ideally, you create Readme files and contribution files and code of content files. You use the template GitHub file, so you don't need, you minimize the time that you need to interact with people to actually know what is happening. You add Docker or Conda files to add reproducibility of your tool. You do documentation, and you can use this service or any other service. And you can add continuous integration easily. It can be very simple or very complex. I have my CV there, and every time that I change something, it renders automatically and it's published automatically. So I don't need to install any code in my computer anymore in my life. I will use GitHub forever for that. So that's all. That's all that I had for today. And I guess that I will pass to Radhika if I know how to stop. Or you can kick me out, maybe.
Okay, I'll kick you out.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. So I'm going to pass it on to Meeta, actually, because, you know, I think we're at our Q&A, not Q&A, but, you know, kind of the discussion portion. And I also wanted to just say that we have some planned events coming up that I will highlight after our discussion. So stay tuned. We have some really cool events coming up.
Thanks, Radhika and Lorena. So now we're going to take this time to basically have a discussion on reproducibility. This is, so because we're a small group, I encourage you, and you don't have to do this, but I encourage you to turn on your video, also unmute yourself. This is really just a free form discussion. We'll pose some questions, but it's also an opportunity for any of you to ask questions, not just to us, but to the larger group. So one of the things we can start with is, what are some effective strategies or solutions that you find works well for data management for either yourself or your group if you're leading a group? I'm curious to know, and as Radhika mentioned, we'll be taking notes, so we'd be happy to share all these resources with you after the meetup. So we can think about also maybe, if data management is implemented as sort of like a centralized approach for you, maybe we can have a show of hands. So how many of you implement it individually versus something that is sort of a centralized approach for your group where, it's determined by, maybe you have a data manager in your group that decides, okay, these are the processes that you need to follow, as a group. To keep things organized. I'd be curious to know. I'll open up my chat too, see if there's anything in there.
If nobody else wants to go, I can go about this. So I work in a small bioinformatics lab at the Brigham in Harvard. Okay. And in my experience, I've noticed that unless it comes on top down from the PI, it's never going to happen. You need the PI to be completely invested in it because you can try and force people to do this and they'll just say, oh, we don't want to listen to you. That's basically it. So you need a top-down approach. But to enable your PI to do this, you need to maybe provide a framework. So definitely the data management at Harvard, that's a good one. That's a really good resource. So pretty much over the past 3 years, I've come up with a whole bunch of things. One of the basic things we start off with was anytime you create any new experiment, like it could be a mass spec or genomics, whatever, we're a mass spec lab, you have to start with a README file. And it has to be formatted correctly. So we created a simple app for this using Python, and we gave people a browser. Like these are things have to be filled up, and only after you do that, and the folder gets created automatically, the README file gets created automatically. So when people leave the lab, you can go back 10 years from now or 5 years from now, like, oh, this project was done by this person. This is how many samples we had. So README files are absolutely key. And so I would definitely start there. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of other stuff I can keep going on, but I don't want to take up all of my time. But yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for getting that started. I agree. README files can be very helpful. I've definitely been in that situation before where I've had to look up either somebody else's project or even my own project, where I was very confused as to what the different files were and what, what I was trying to do. So definitely having a README helps give you that direction when you're picking up an older project. Anyone else have any ideas or
I think
thoughts?
Peter had its hand raised.
Oh, I accidentally raised my hand, but I do have a question.
Sure.
I'm mostly a software engineer and very familiar with working with the command line, but I'm embedded in a lab where everyone knows RStudio, and I want to know how to make their lives easy to say, okay, we want everything in Git and we want everything in Docker. Is it easy to think in RStudio and just say, oh, make me my Docker container from my environment? Or what's the common practice for having a consistent Docker environment linked to what you're doing in RStudio?
Maybe Lorena, do you want to take this? Okay. So the idea with Docker is that you're not saving it every time. It's like a static image with, you can change it, of course, but a static image with a certain setup. And so for a lab situation, and this is kind of what we somewhat do in our group, is, we have these set images that we then build a container from. And then we use that container, and unless there is something to really kind of customize and save, we don't actually save the changes that we've made in the container. So you can have, for a lab, like if everybody's doing something similar and you want people to have some consistency, you can create some images. But those images, you don't want them to be too heavy. So you might want to just say it has these packages to be able to do, say, just the simple bulk RNA-seq analysis. And then people can run those images. So that's kind of my response to that. I wouldn't say that and within that image, you can have R and RStudio specific versions available. So you're usually not going back from RStudio into Docker. You're going from Docker to RStudio, usually. But also you had a question in chat about Git, and I'll just kind of quickly answer that, and I'll give you my opinion and not answer that necessarily. Is RStudio has a built-in functionality for Git and GitHub, and you can pull and push with from within RStudio, and that does make it handy to kind of coordinate. So I'll stop there, and Lorena wanted to say something.
It was just that in the sense of maybe only keeping track of packages versions inside RStudio, but the same R version is the same always across. There is this packrat package that for each project you can have a specific version of these tools, and then so you don't force other projects to use the same versions in case one maybe need to be updated but the other not. So you can do something similar to Docker, but just for the package, but all inside the same R version. So it gives you a little bit less reproducible or flexibility than Docker, because Docker you can use anything you want. But maybe that is as well other thing that I saw for people to isolate projects.
Yeah, I think you've answered my question. There's no magic bullet, because what I see in practice is you're working, you say, oh, I need this package. You just say package install, you get an answer. And now you commit to GitHub and we have continuous integration and we run and the thing fails because it's in the wrong, the package hasn't been installed. And I wasn't sure if there was some magic solution for this where we can just say, publish my GitHub, publish my Docker file that would have the packages I just installed from our studio. All right, I'll have to make that.
Keep us posted.
Yeah, I will. I was hoping, this seems obvious, but if it doesn't exist, it seems like something we should have.
Do you mean other than the Docker file, Peter? This is Adelaide. Like,
Yeah.
I guess I'm like, other than the Docker file, you want some automation for new packages.
Yeah, it's more around, I wanted to know how people work day to day, because I usually inherit a project that works for me, and then I run it in a production pipeline, and we go through the hassle of, okay, our package management's never fun.
Right.
So we just require a Docker file before we start running it.
Okay.
So it's just that, what's the workflow? I know how to make a Docker file that has all the right packages, but I don't know how to tell my new bioinformatics graduate who might not know what Docker is to say, you have to give me this. So I was hoping that I could just say, oh, similar to with Git integration, now I can say, oh, just use RStudio and learn Git and everything's fine. I don't see the similar with Docker.
I mean, there are options like this community, what was doing is that every time that, I mean, you still need, although you can have a script that generate the dependencies, but if you have a script that generates the dependency for your environment and say, oh, this package is new, and you have a Docker file that you can modify through that script, the Docker Hub can recognize that there is a change there and create the Docker image. So,
yeah.
But still you need to automatize that first step of.
Yes. So that's why my question was, oh, isn't there a drop-down menu, export Docker file that remembers all the packages I just installed?
So there's actually a way to do this. If you're familiar with Python, you know how requirements.txt that lists all the libraries that you're using. So there's requirements done by Hadley right now. So when you finish doing your stuff, just to run that package, it'll generate a list of packages you've used. And now have people do that, and that way you can use that to install it.
Oh, great. So, what was the name of that package?
It's requirements. So just like in Python. And of course, Hadley did it. The other way I would suggest is, if they want to use a package, you can just do install packages or whatever libraries that you have and generate a file from that. And just use that to install it. If you want, I can email you a script I have for this. So I literally do this when I'm deploying Shiny apps between my computer and a Linux server. I don't want to install everything each time. So that's one.
I'd love to look at that. I've written that script like 7 or 8 times, but yeah, I haven't written that in a while. So
right. So
I was hoping,
Yeah, it would be great if, Vasant, you could share that on Slack. And that
way, I think I'm on the side. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll just comment it nicely because right now it's pretty sparse.
Yeah, and we do something similar in our group for just like a basic install is something like that, but not back and forth from Docker.
Right.
I just want to mention that I found kind of on topic but off topic, but I liked how the Nextflow example that someone put up on the GitHub, the way their Docker file is written with the Conda installs, I felt like was really clever because you could just pass an environment file as a YAML file in to the Docker file. So you don't have to change the Docker every time you just change the environment file for Conda. But I don't know if there's something equivalent for our packages where like there's a command you can pass the environment file and save it, because I just felt like that was such a time saver when I discovered that approach to the Nextflow GitHub maintenance that was posted earlier. Anyway. because the Docker file basically just says read the conda environment file that's in this GitHub. You know what I mean? Like, so the Docker file never changes. It's only the environment file.
I think that it should be possible. I mean, you can always put one line R of, you know, like install all the packages from this file or something like that. So actually that, I think that if there is a one, I don't know if it's a nicer or not way, but for sure it could be done that way. So actually that is good. Yeah, I forgot about that. Can I quickly, oh, okay. But can I quickly answer? There was somebody asking about Gitlab. I'm using Gitlab now as well. It seems pretty similar than GitHub. It has as well its own continuous integration that is very similar to GitHub Actions. So I guess that all of that should be the same. Actually, I think that it, like the layout, try to make easier to have different projects and maybe jump between them and collaborate with people. But if somebody works more, please chime in. But for now, I see that it's pretty compatible with it. Like it's almost the same, just maybe a few details different, but the same.
Is GitLab like more for projects, sort of?
It's the same thing. So GitLab is basically an more open source than GitHub. So it's completely open source. And if you, so partners makes you use it if you work in any of the partners related. And you can even sync, if you already have stuff up in GitHub, you can easily import it all into GitLab. So that's basically it. It's pretty much the same thing. Yeah, there's no GitHub Actions, of course. That uses Travis, I think, for now. But other than that, nothing else. Everything, you can do the same thing on the command line and everything else. So
great, thank you. So it looks like we're getting to time, unless I see a hand raised. Yes,
well,
please. Go ahead,
sorry.
Jen.
to piggyback off of the GitHub discussion, so I'm a grad student and we have not done a good job of version control in my lab in the past. So we're trying to fix that. And luckily my PI is very much on board. We have some staff scientists who are less on board, but I'm working on them. And so I was wondering if anyone could offer any sort of advice for if you were setting up a GitHub for like an organization, ours being a lab, like what are some pitfalls or, you know, things that you would recommend just to do right the first time, I guess?
That's a good question. One thing that we did in one of my plays was, so you create organization. We defined the teams with different roles because we needed at some point that not everybody needs to be admin or whatever about everybody. So you can define teams for that. And then, but the most important thing that we did is to create a naming convention for the repositories because it got like hell pretty quickly, and we have some keywords that it helped us to say, okay, this is a code software tool, this is an analysis tool, this is a, I don't know, a custom analysis that it will happen only once in your life. So it was easy to, with the naming, look through that. So that for us was like, okay, we did it at once at the first time, and it was good.
Okay.
Yeah, I set up an organization too for a lab who was like totally new to GitHub. And I did similar thing to what Lorena described, the naming conventions, but basically having a markdown in there that had all the guidelines. So it's like anyone new coming to this organization needs to read through this, almost like an SOP, just like, okay, this is how, these are where these files go. This is when you're creating a project, this is how you name it. And just kind of having that, I think, was really helpful for anybody getting started and novice GitHub users.
Yeah, which is like all of us. So that's helpful.
You can call that knowledge base.
Yeah.
I would add to that using it. So everyone,
yes.
if I say, if someone, I say must put it in Git, then the next couple weeks we'll review, so that if it's someone siloed on their own project, there's some motivation to just use it, and then using it 2 or 3 times is way better, because then I've helped solve some problems that people didn't realize were problems. Like they'll have one folder with 3 different copies of the same code, copy .version1, .version2, and someone who's more seasoned can say, oh, you don't have to do that with Git. And so just having a more experienced person work with the newer people, maybe once a week or a couple times a week, would really ease that fear of, or just to go around, kind of address the fact that this isn't pointless. It's supposed to be a tool to help your research, not a burden.
Yeah, add to that, do a actually scheduled code review. So maybe once in 2 weeks or once in 3 weeks, and actually enforce it and tell people this is not to shame you. Everybody makes mistakes in codes. Everybody's code stinks, but collectively we learn better this way, and we can show each other what we are working on and maybe get some help. And having that code review done regularly will help you as a lab go forward. And also tell them that even after, if it's a private project, tell them to pick a project 6 months from, back in June 2020. Can you just tell me what you did here? And they will, I'll guarantee you, I can't, nobody can. And this will definitely help. So promote it that way. This is a way to help yourself do better, because your worst collaborator is you 6 months ago.
Okay.
The good thing these days is that for academic institutions, if you create an organization, you can keep things private or public.
Right.
And having teams, different people being able to see what the private code is. Also, people can work privately until they're ready to share with the team, which you should encourage, at least internally. But I think that also helps with the learning process. Is like the whole world is not seeing and judging you.
Right.
Just on a practical level, the GitHub itself has these little tutorials that spin up these fake like repositories and stuff that go away after the training's over. They're actually really helpful, because I always get confused about branching, even though I've been doing GitHub for years. And I took their little tutorial on branching, and I was like, it just made it so much more clear. And they're self-paced. It's that's an easy way for people who've never done it to push and pull and see what's a fork, what's a branch. I thought they were really good quality, so I recommend that.
Okay, great, thanks.
That's awesome. If people have thoughts, please join us on our Slack channel. We can continue this conversation there. If you have thoughts for like creating a new channel for reproducibility or data management, we can, also do that. But on that note, I just want to share my screen again, and I'll share my notes. I've taken notes. Just kind of highlight that we have 2 new events that we are planning. Well, the first one is a series of events. We are planning to have an hour with someone in the field who's been doing bioinformatics, has something to talk about. So Geraldine, who was just on the call today, she wasn't able to stay, but she's written a really cool genomics book, Genomics and the Cloud, and she's going to talk to us about that. And I think that also ties in with reproducibility a little bit, in addition to just bioinformatics in general. And then the second one we have upcoming, hopefully in the next maybe 3 months, is allyship. We are collaborating with BCBB. If you haven't heard of it, they're another meetup group. It's a much larger group. I think it's the Bioinformatics and Computational Biology group. I can't remember with exactly what BCBP stands for, but it's a larger group, and we are talking about doing an event on allyship, or we are going to do an event on allyship. And given that this group was so diverse and amazing, I think, and I'm sure all of you are interested in being good allies. So let us know your thoughts if you have any kind of ideas, suggestions. I'm not organizing that, like another co-organizer is organizing that, but we have all of these coming up. And if you don't know or are not on our Slack, I have a short link here at the bottom to join our Slack, and I'll post it in chat as well. So that's kind of what we had. We also had a poll, and I know we have very few people left right now, but topics of interest. Are you interested in like us having a session that digs deeper into any one of these topics that are related to reproducibility? And then we can either have a session during like a proper meetup event or a you know, kind of a peripheral event sort of on the side. Yeah, and we didn't talk about singularity. I see a lot of you are choosing singularity, which I know you can't see. So if everybody's selected, I'm going to end the poll and share results so you can see. So I think 4 of you voted, which is good. So we can talk about, yeah, some of these things and expand on them in the future. So thanks again for giving us your input on this. We're at 101. Mita, Lorena, anything else to add?
No, just thank you for coming.
Yeah, just thank you to everyone for coming and for participating. It was a great discussion. So hope to see you at a future event soon.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.